The marble is cracking. The aqueducts whisper with weeds. And at the edge of the world, where Rome still claims to rule, the fires burn low. You've heard of Roman triumphs? Gold eagles lifted in victory, of Caesar crossing the Rubicon, of roads so straight they divided continents. But what if I told you those roads were now broken? That the standards were tarnished and the legions scattered? That the world didn't end in a blaze, but in a sigh? Because the truth of Rome is not in the monuments, not in the art, not in the poems that celebrate martial might, but in the dust of the road, the rust of the forgotten weapons, and the faces of the men who stood when all was lost. And there are no finer faces than those of the Danubian cohort. For 200 years, Rome has held the Danube in its grasp, 200 years of blood and bone. And here, at the farthest flung province, where the legion meets the wild men beyond, the fires burn low. Do you think it was easy to hold this land, to tame these shores? These men have fought back, tooth and nail, barbarian and Goth, Hun and Sarmathian. And the legions have paid the price. They've paid it in blood, sweat, and sinew. And now they pay it in fear, for the enemies are gathering, and soon the wild men will be at the gate. And what then? What will the eagle do when the barbarians come? Will it flee, or will it fight? I am but a humble chronicler, a traveler far from home. I've seen the legions at their best, and I've seen them at their worst. I've watched them drive back the Gauls from the Alps, and I've watched them broken and sent reeling before the Goths. I've seen the valor of the men, the valor of their horses. I've heard the clash of steel on steel and the screams of men cut down in their prime. Oh, the pride of Rome is a shield wall, strong, unbroken, steadfast, holding firm against the shock of the fray. But the pride of Rome is also a shield wall broken, crumbling, falling apart. The eagle has flown, the legions are scattered, and the barbarians are at the gate. Did the world really end in a sigh? Yes, the world ended when the legions fell and the barbarians breached the walls. It ended in a whisper carried on the wind across the lonely moors. Can you hear it now? Can you hear the whisper of the dead? You wouldn't last a day on Rome's final frontier, not because you're weak or unskilled, but because you're not Roman. Your name isn't Latin. Your accent marks you as other. You are one of the foederati, bound to Rome by treaty, not by blood. You weren't trained in the heart of the empire, but you were conscripted. Or perhaps you enlisted because it was safer than starving. You wake before the sun in a wooden fort on the cold banks of the Danube. The wind cuts through the cracks in the walls. Your armor is repaired by hand, passed down from another auxilia who went missing on patrol. His place taken by a Pict with a haunted look in his eyes. Your rations are dried beans, coarse bread, sometimes nothing. The locals call you invader. Your commander calls you auxilia, which is auxiliary troops, but has taken on a new meaning. It means expendable. Rome is counting on you because you have nothing left to lose, not like the legionaries, who grew up in the shadow of the Colosseum, who learned the ways of war in the sand, who were promised land and glory. They had dreams. You don't even know what the eagle looks like that you're supposed to die for. You haven't seen Rome in years, if ever. You've heard the whispers. They say the emperor won't send reinforcements. They say your pay won't come this season. They say Rome has already fallen in all but name. The Goths are at the gate and Rome is sending you to stop them. You look out over the wild men of the north, who have never known peace, and who will never bend the knee to Caesar. They do not know the discipline of arms, but they know the will to survive. They fight like wolves. You have no songs. You have no glory. You have your orders. Theirs is a desperate bid for survival against an empire that has run out of road. Yours is a desperate bid to stay alive on the edge of oblivion. You're just a number, Auxiliary 374, whatever your real name is. They gave you a Roman name when they took you from your village, a name that means survivor. If you make it off this frontier, you'll keep that name. If you die here, it dies with you. The legionaries around you think you're lucky. At least you get to fight for Rome, they say. At least you get to die for Rome, they say. They do not know where you come from. They do not know what you have seen. They do not know that you would rather be dead than live under the yoke of Rome. They do not know that you are the enemy within. You patch boots and mend armor. You stack supplies and build barricades. You watch the Goths ride out of the forest, their horses thundering like a storm. You watch them come again and again, and you hold the line. You are Rome's last line, the forgotten, the expendable. the foederal, the auxiliary, the barbarian. You are Rome's last line. From the ashes of empires to the fall of kings, experience the dramatic conclusion to Rome's epic story. Rome is built on 7 hills, but its real foundation was men. It's not just any men, mind you, but men of iron. Iron like the great emperor Marcus Aurelius. It's iron like the fierce Septimius Severus. Iron like today's subject, the last Roman general who held the West together when it was falling apart. His name was Stilicho. He was not Roman by blood. He was born of a Vandal, father, and a Roman mother. But Flavius Stilicho bled for Rome more than those who wore the toga. Stilicho rose to become the master of cavalry under the Western Emperor Honorius. And though he was criticized for his Germanic looks, his discipline knew no equal. When he had to write orders to his troops, he did so in Greek, in Latin, the languages of the East and West, showing that he thought not of his own blood, but of all Rome. He was even related by marriage to the imperial line, having betrothed his own daughter to the future Emperor Valentinian III. So Stilicho really wanted the best for Rome, perhaps even more than Rome wanted for itself. He inherited a fracturing empire from his predecessors. Barbarian tribes flooded through the Rhine and Danube, and Rome's old allies were becoming new enemies. The first order of business was the Visigoths. Under the previous emperors, they had been allowed to settle in Pannonia. But now they were advancing into Italy. A decade earlier, that would have been unthinkable. But Rome was a shadow of its former self. Stilicho made peace with them. He actually gave them 3,000 gold pieces and allowed them to keep whatever booty they took with them. But this didn't stop them from sacking Oculair. Soon after, the allies of the Goths attacked the Roman province of Noricum. Stilicho marched 160 kilometers in 5 days to relieve the siege of the city of Poetovio. There he crushed the coalition of barbarians, killing or capturing most of their leaders. From there, he secured the northern frontier with a series of defensive walls and fortifications. These would come to be known as the Stilicho Walls, and they protected the north for decades. The Gothic king Alaric I invaded again in 395, and got as far as the gates of Rome before Stilicho beat him back. Yet another Gothic king, Ataulf, threatened Rome in 396, but he too was forced to turn back. Rome was saved, but at what cost? By pragmatism. While the Senate cheered for blood and thunder, Stilicho paid enemies in gold and sent them packing. He stalled the Goths in marshes, outmaneuvered them with maps instead of spears. But this was not what the Roman elite wanted. They demanded spectacle, so Stilicho obliged. He hosted games in the circus and the amphitheater, giving the people the bloodlust they demanded. But behind the scenes he made deals with Rome's enemies, paying them to stay away from the city. It was a necessary evil, but it earned him the hatred of the Roman nobility. Whispers grew, plots twisted. Envy sharpened blades in the dark. In 408, the disgruntled senator Petronius Maximus murdered the emperor's brother and set Rome aflame. When Honorius fell ill, Maximus accused Stilicho of poisoning him, and the emperor arrested the general. Though Maximus was later executed for his treachery, Stilicho was never freed. He was executed without a trial, stabbed to death by soldiers in the Praetorian camp. The crowds that once cheered his name turned cold. They murdered his allies and his family. 3 years later, the Visigoths entered Rome. No one stood in their way. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Rome's greatest general should have led it to victory, not its greatest defeat. But that was the thing about Stilicho. He knew that Rome could not be saved by pride, only by pragmatism. He understood that the barbarians were not monsters, but men who also wanted a better life for themselves and their children. He tried to show the Romans that it was possible to live with the Goths, to accept them, to learn from them. He could speak their language. He could have saved Rome if the Romans had followed him, but they didn't. They chose their own doom. And this is why Stilicho is remembered not as the savior of Rome, but as a footnote in history, a footnote to the empire's fall, a barbarian general who came close. And now for our final story, a tale of valor and tragedy, but also of unanswered questions and haunting mysteries. It's about a legion. It's not just any legion, mind you, but one of Rome's most elite, feared and decorated. They were known as the Legento II, an unstoppable force forged in war, tempered by discipline and glory. Their name alone struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Then one day they vanished, not with a whimper or a roar, but with an eerie silence that echoed through the ages. In the annals of Rome, there is no record of their passing, no mention of their demise. They simply disappeared, leaving behind a legacy of valor and a mystery that has endured for centuries. I don't know when it happened. Historians peg it somewhere around the early 2nd century AD. We don't know how it happened. There are theories, speculations, whispers of what might have befallen them. We don't know why it happened. We do know where it happened. Somewhere in Caledonia, the wild and rugged land of the Scottish Highlands. This is the story of the 9th Legion, the Vanishing Legion. In the 1st century AD, the Legio Nona was stationed in Illyricum, the Roman name for York. They were a veteran unit, battle-hardened soldiers who had seen their share of campaigns and conquests. They were a mix of seasoned veterans and eager young recruits, all bound by the duty and discipline that defined the Roman legions. They were well-trained, well-equipped, and ready for anything. They were, as the Romans would say, parati ad omnia, ready for anything. Their commander was a man named Petilius Caralis, a Roman senator and military leader. Under his command, the legion maintained order, defended the frontiers, and spread Roman influence. The legion was a vital part of Rome's northern defenses, a bulwark against the tribes of Caledonia. The tribes of Caledonia, also called the Scots, were fierce and independent people who lived in the rugged and remote highlands. They were known for their skill in battle, their tenacity, and their love for freedom. The Romans considered them a threat, and the Legio Nona was tasked with keeping them under control. But something happened. Something that would change the legion forever. We don't know exactly what happened, but we know that the legion was sent to Caledonia to deal with a local chieftain named Calgacus. According to one version, the legion was lured into a trap by Calgacus and annihilated in battle. According to another, the legion was ambushed by multiple tribes and wiped out. According to a third, the legion mutinied and was disbanded. Whatever happened, the legion ceased to exist. There is no record of their victory or their defeat. No inscriptions, no monuments, no memorials. As if they had never been there at all. So was it a military defeat? If so, it was one of the worst in Roman history. The entire legion, along with its commander, disappeared without a trace. Was it a mutiny? If so, it was one of the largest in Roman history. A full legion turning against the empire. The silence is deafening. It raises more questions than it answers. Why was a whole legion sent to such a remote and dangerous place? Why was a seasoned commander like Petilius Caralesius put in charge of such a risky mission? And why was there no record of what happened to the legion? There are theories, of course. Some historians believe that the legion was sent to Caledonia to put down a rebellion. Others believe that the legion was sent to conquer new territory. Still others believe that the legion was sent to defend the frontier. But those are just theories. We don't know the truth. What we do know is that the legion left no heirs. No descendants carried on their legacy. No traditions survived their ordeal. No stories were passed down through the ages. The legion was erased from history. Or was it, in recent years? Some historians have argued that the 9th Legion was not destroyed, but reassigned to the east. They point to coins minted by the legion that were found in areas far from Caledonia as evidence that the legion survived. They also point to a few tombstones that were found with the legion's insignia as proof that the legion continued to exist. But those are only fragments, pieces of a shattered whole. They don't tell us what happened to the legion. They don't explain why the legion was erased from history. They don't answer the why of the vanishing legion. And that's the most haunting part of this mystery. We may never know what happened to the 9th Legion, but we can remember them, we can honor them, we can learn from them. They may be gone, but they are not forgotten. Here's to the 9th Legion, the vanishing legion. May your sacrifice never be in vain. There's nothing left but sand, said the tourist. He looked around at the crumbling ruins, the empty streets, the weathered statues. This was once the greatest city in the world, he said, his voice echoing in the vast square. Well, that's what they thought. He'd come to Rome to see its monuments, to marvel at its history. But he wasn't here when the history happened. So let's go back before the fall, before the sack of Rome, before the barbarians came. Let us go back to the days when the emperor still lived in the great palaces near the center of the city. In the year 284, the emperor was Diocletian. Born in the province of Syria, He had spent his entire career fighting, conquering, and most importantly, holding the borders of the empire. Now, an old man, he wanted only two things. First, to be left alone. And second, to watch the grain ships arrive from Africa, filling the granaries so the people of Rome wouldn't starve. Far from the border posts and barracks, Rome still glittered, or tried to. Senators threw feasts while the plague lingered outside the villa gates. In the country, lamps were lit with oil shipped at great risk across a crumbling empire. Peacocks were roasted while the wheat fields of Africa fell to rebels. Done. Inside the atriums, slaves fanned away the heat. The masters discussed philosophy, recited Cicero, and debated how many gods still cared. But even in the marble halls, fear lingered. The streets were no longer safe at night. The baths were emptier. And news from the provinces came slower, or not at all. Still, life went on. That's why the emperor kept coming back to this city even after he'd given up on defending it. He could ride in from the coast in his golden chariot, take one look around, and feel a twinge of pride. The aqueducts still flowed, the roads were still paved. Even the Colossus of Rome had held out against the rising tide. At least for now, everything seemed fine. It was just a matter of pretending. The real work was done far from the capital, where generals campaigned to keep the borders secure. Men like Constantius, Caesar of the western half of the empire, he'd received orders to move east, to meet with his colleague, Licinius, to coordinate, to plan for the future. There'd be a conference, a meeting of the Caesars, something like that. Only it never happened. Constans got as far as Gaul. Then he heard rumors about a gathering of barbarians, a huge force massing on the Rhine, threatening to spill into Italy. Maybe it was a rumor. Maybe it didn't matter. His job was to stop them. So he turned south, marched into northern Italy, and met the horde. Whatever they were made of, they broke before his legions. Soon, the river was full of their corpses. The rest fled into the forest. Meanwhile, in Rome, the senators decided the best response was wine. They uncorked vintage after vintage, drank deep, and watched the revelers stumble by. As the year wore on, more and more letters arrived from the provinces. Wheat growers in Africa reported their fields were being ravaged by rebels. Soldiers along the Danube wrote about barbarian incursions. Governors in Asia Minor spoke of sacks and shipwrecks. In Gaul, the governor's wife sent word that her husband had been executed by a local chieftain. As winter approached, the roads grew slick with rain. People huddled indoors, counting their blessings. At least the fountains still flowed. At least the Colosseum still stood. At least the ghosts of Rome hadn't quite moved on yet. The emperor hosted one last party, a festival in honor of the 8 years since he'd come to power. His colleagues and their families came from all over the empire to celebrate. They rode in on horseback, escorted by veterans, and lined up in the hippodrome to watch the races. The chariots thundered around the track, whipping the crowds into a frenzy. Then a hush fell over the crowd as the Imperials entered the stands. The emperor waved to the cheering people. For a moment, he felt a surge of pride. It hadn't been so bad. Maybe it was getting better, and maybe Rome still had a chance. And then a shadow passed over his face. Looking down the long avenue leading to the palace, he saw them, the incoming ambassadors from Persia, riding in on elephants. You can tell a lot about a civilization by the way it ends. Join me next time as we explore the amazing ruins of Teotihuacan and learn how this ancient city in Mexico met its end. You stood the line long after others fled. You patched the wall while the senators debated its necessity. You followed a general who tried and was punished for trying. You listened for horns in the forest and instead heard nothing. Rome did not end in fire. It ended in fragments scattered across time, buried under quiet. But here now, in the still of night, we remember. Not the empire, but the effort. Not the glory, but the grit. Sleep well. The frontier's quiet for now. You stood the line, long after others fled. You faced the darkness, knowing only the cold, hard truth of what was at stake. No glory, no fanfare, just survival. You held your ground even when the debate raged on, a furious symphony of bickering and lies. They argued about the wall's purpose, its cost, its very necessity, while you toiled to keep it standing. The weight of their words, a heavy silence pressing down on you. Brick by aching brick, you rebuilt the wall, not for the glory of an empire, but for the quiet hope of another day. You followed a general who dared to dream of a different ending, a general who saw not the glory of conquest, but the quiet strength in holding back the tide. You marched beside him, shouldering your burden, enduring the scorn of those who preferred a false peace to a hard-won victory. You watched as he was punished for his pains, for his foresight, for his sacrifice. Yet still you held to the belief that one day his name would be cleared, his efforts honored. You listened for the horns in the forest, a sound that promised both glory and death. But all you heard was the whisper of the wind through the trees, a mournful song of loss and absence. The horns did not blare that day, or if they did, you were too far from the forest to hear it. Perhaps it was a mercy, a sparing of needless bloodshed. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the horns had fallen silent, because there was no one left to hear them. Sleep well, weary traveler. Rest your weary bones beneath the endless sky. Let the nightmares of the frontier fade into the quiet of the night. For though Rome did not end in fire, it ended nonetheless. It ended in fragments scattered across time, buried under centuries of dirt and regret. All that's left now is this: a crumbling wall, a whispered name, a memory of a sacrifice made on a far-off shore. Remember that, little one, and sleep well. For the frontier is quiet for now.